really hard decision to come when it was such a gorgeous night out, and I entirely empathize with that, and I know that everyone made this decision to come in from this gorgeous summer night, so thank you. My name is Marilyn Halpern. I'm the Director of Education here at Chicago Shakespeare Theatre, and we are honored to host the Symposium, which now is culminating in the end of our 5th year of working with Golden Apple and National Lewis as partners to create these conversations on our stage. Education is a tremendously important part of all of our missions, and the same room that we're sitting in today is where we bring 40,000 students a year to come and see our work. This beautiful set belongs to our award-winning musical Sense and Sensibility. So you'll never see this space looking quite this way again, and it's quite magical. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Don Belmonte, who is the president of Golden Apple Foundation, who will kick off this evening for us. Don.
Thank you, Marilyn. Golden Apple is proud to be partnered with this great institution and National Lewis in the Symposium series. I sing of Olaf, lad and big, whose very heart recoiled at war, a conscientious object door. I don't know when your first exposure to the arts was, but 12-year-old me, in the classroom of Sister Mary Holy Water, or was it Sister Mary Perpetual Astonishment? One of those two names I don't remember, but she was sweet and she was dear. And it was a time of year like now when it was necessary to try to keep the 12-year-olds from being 12-year-olds. And so it was time for the poetry unit. And so she tried to regale us with the prototypical Cummings poem that you get in 7th grade, The Unjust Spring of a Beautiful Blue Man whose first fire and me and made no sense to me. But I found later on other Cummings poems, and my first of them was I Sing of Olaf. And I know exactly how it was, and it was that poem that transformed a little 12-year-old me, reading about the conscientious objector and the torments that he had. And in the line of the version that I had, since it was, again, this was 66, there is line, there is some S, period, I will not eat. And it took me for a while, and it was like there is some S, I will not eat. It became my motto as a 12-year-old. And then the music of 66 came, and it was, in fact, transformative. In the Atlantic Monthly, the author, Alexander Maxim, writes about his experience seeing I Sing of Olaf the first time when he was 12 years old. At the time, I cared nothing for school. I was always ditching campus to smoke pot beneath the Santa Monica Pier. I was a wretched student on academic probation who would one day fail all of his classes. And yet here is this poem, deep and frightening. He talked about his teacher, too, how it affected him. He felt deeply. His feeling was inspired by something beyond us in this tiny school. His intensity was an indictment of disengagement, an indictment of people like me, safe in my shrugging scorn, my affected adolescent indifference. In that classroom at 12 years old, I was so angry, so sad on all else behalf, so hypnotized by my teacher, I wanted to do something about it. And if a short poem could make me feel that way, could show me something I'd never seen, well, that's what I wanted to do. It was right. There are many, many people who have been saved by the presence of the arts in their time, and particularly poetry in their problem. And its importance is what brings us here today with people who are far more accomplished and far more active in the effort to try to maintain the life of the arts in this testmatic school society that we find ourselves in. So to help us along this line, I introduce to you our guest and host of this, Miss Allison Cuddy.
I'm always happy to be preceded by the hilarity of Dom and the graciousness of Marilyn. Thank you. I did not expect this. this as a fan of Jane Austen. This set is not what I, thought it would be drawing room, country house. It's very glamorous. I'm so real honored to be here and happy to see all of you. And we will be talking about that pivotal moment, that encounter with the arts, and all the difference it makes. But I want to get to the conversation right away, so I'm going to start by introducing our two, I'll use the word we use at the Chicago Humanities Festival because we're very fancy there, interlocutors. Yeah, we got a lot to live up to here. So I'll start with the local guy, although, dear reader, he's not really local. He's from Los Angeles. The scandal. But he is the Director of Arts Education at Chicago Public Schools, Evan Plummer. He started out in LA in museum education, and then had a pivotal year in Mozambique teaching in an art school. Somehow wound up in Chicago and got involved in arts integration at Chicago Public School, and clearly they knew he was a great thing because they recruited him, and nearly a decade later, he is now the Director of Arts Education. So please join me in welcoming Evan Plummer. So one of my favorite lines from Sense and Sensibility is very short but to the point. It's know your own happiness. And I feel like that could sum up the life and times and philosophy of Bill Strickland, our other interlocutor tonight. He is from one of my favorite cities in the United States. It's where I went to grad school, Pittsburgh. And there he is the CEO of Manchester Bidwell, which sounds like a very important corporate office, but it's actually an amazing community arts center and job training center that's been operating now for over 3 decades. He's also a MacArthur genius. He won a MacArthur Fellowship in 1996. He's the author of a really inspiring book, Making the Impossible Possible, and he's here with us tonight. Please welcome Bill Strickland. So I'm just going to steal Don's good idea to start us off by asking both of you to tell us the story of your first encounter with the arts. I mean, what made you decide the arts education, which is kind of a wonderful and thankless task in some ways, given that we are always defending the importance of arts as part of education, but what decided you on that course in life, arts education? Bill, do you want to start us off?
Literally was walking on the corner of our high school, kind of minding my own business, and the art room door was open. The art teacher happened to be a ceramic artist. The school, almost by accident, had a potter's wheel, and the guy just happened to be making a ceramic bowl when I walked by the art room door. And you've ever seen clay done, it's like magic. And I was just transfixed with this. And he turned around, he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, man, what is that?" He said, "That's ceramics." I said, "Well, why don't you teach me how to do that?" He says, "Well, I'll get your homeroom teacher, sign a piece of paper, said you can come here, and you're good to go." So for the remaining 2 years of high school, I cut all my classes, and I went to the art room. But I was smart enough to give the teachers some classes to come to the program I made, and they gave me passing grades. And that's how I got out of all high school. And right after that, I decided to try to replicate my experience with kids in my neighborhood, which has turned out to be how I've lived this 40 years of my life.
And then what about you?
Yeah, I would have to say that I was always surrounded by artists and arts, right? We were in the LA area, and we would always go see films, and I would always go home and then draw the movie poster I saw at the movie theater. So that was like, and then I would put them on the wall, and like my room was the movie theater, and I would like charge people to come in and watch the movie, and there were like draw pictures, like move them around, and we were at the cinema. So I think it was that experience that always just sort of allowed me to stay dreaming and stay drawing.
So I love this idea because obviously it's something that can happen in school, right? But it can also happen beyond school, on your own. So I want to come back to that theme. But Bill, I mean, that classroom that you kind of just happened to be passing at that pivotal moment, that was Frank Ross, right? Who became a really important person in your life. And as you say, someone who was important to you, but also that classroom is kind of the model, right, for what you went on to do at your center. So let's talk a little bit about, arts education. What is the model? What's your vision of arts ed?
Well, primarily I think it's an immersion experience. And you don't have to be cold to the arts or be genetically oriented to the arts to be a part of the arts. I think the arts is a language. It's a way of thinking about human experience that is reflected in dance, and play, and photography, and poetry, and so on. But I think it's accessible to everybody. Primarily when children are born into the world, at least the mothers in many cases instinctively know that the path to good mental health and good learning is the arts, because we sing and rhyme and dance and color with children. Then they take it away from them when they reach 5 years old and wonder why the kids aren't normal for the next 50. The arts is a part of our biology. We need the arts to be healthy. It is a part of our development. It needs to be intellectual and emotional experience. So based on that idea, Mr. Ross used to bring in jazz albums. He brought in books on poetry. I got a camera, started doing stuff on photography. All the hip young teachers would hang out in Mr. Ross's room. So it became a place of intelligence and fervor and excitement and, quote, mental health. And I think that I was so transformed by that experience, I literally tried to replicate that classroom, and I called it a program called Manchester Craftsman's Guild, which I started doing riots on the basis of the same things that Mr. Ross had done in his classroom, and now it's taken off to be a pretty big story.
Yeah, so let's talk about where you did that and the neighborhood you were in, Manchester, in Pennsylvania, a neighborhood in Pittsburgh. What was going on?
Well, it was my neighborhood, and it was the riots. You know, the Black Panthers were there, the town was on fire, and there was a lot of money flowing in the streets. And I just happened to be one of the guys standing there who got some of it. And it wasn't any particular philosophy.
You mean money to like rebuild after, this was like the 60s, 68?
Yeah, there was a lot of money because of the riots. Corporations and foundations and the government was pouring money in. I just happened to be a guy standing there. My vision was to take the money, create a center to have children be able to have an experience like mine using the arts as the strategy, which made as much sense as anything else that was going on. And in my case, however, we started to get outcomes almost instantaneously. So I hung out a free sign that said free clay, and the kids passing by the studio would eventually start wandering in, and after a while they kept coming, and we started building experiences with these kids. Then I started hearing back from the school that was across the street that the kids were starting to show up at school more regularly. And a couple of the teachers says, well, we don't know what you're doing with these guys, but keep doing it because the kids are decidedly different. They're showing up more regularly, and they're paying attention. After a couple of years, I figured it out. There wasn't anything wrong with the kids. The issue was how the school was responding to the children, not the children themselves. So my educational theory was, give these kids enough clay, enough sunlight, and something decent to eat, and enough enthusiasm, and you could largely solve what was troubling these children. And we had 40 years of evidence to know that we're right.
So how does that resonate with you, Evan, that notion that it's not the kids, it's the school, and it's how the schools are responding to the children? That's kind of the issue that Bill was pinpointing. Because, I mean, CPS has embarked on this really ambitious project over the last 3 years to essentially, kind of redistribute arts education throughout the system.
Right, so when I think about the Chicago Public Schools Arts Education Plan, which was released in 2012, and just how it helped us to understand what is the arts education landscape, right? Like, what arts being taught where are the arts teachers, where are they not, and then really trying to understand what kinds of arts resources are in schools, whether during in-school time or out-of-school time, from organizations, and it helps us to understand then where we can grow programs and then enhance the ones that already exist. Because what we want to see, or at least what I want to see, is every student having a teacher like a Frank Ross. Like, I want to have every student, all 400,000 of them in Chicago public schools, having access to a high-quality arts education that then allows them to expand their world, expand their knowledge, learn more about who they are as human beings, so that we see these outcomes that we saw with Bill. They're coming to school, engaged more, having creative conversations, being creative with each other, creating things, making things. I think that that's what we're really trying to see happen through the arts education plan. And part of that is ensuring that it's just not words on a page or words on a website, but there's actual actions behind the recommendations.
Yeah, so what are the steps toward building like 1,000 Frank Rosses or Frank Ross classrooms? I mean, if we take that as our model.
Right, so when I returned from Africa and I was joined the Final Performing Arts Management Cluster Program, I was working with Mario Rosero and a team of about 120 arts educators to either turn them into Frank Rosses, or if they were already a Frank Ross, elevate that even more. So really trying to create the conditions under which teachers could succeed in creating curriculum and taking a more leadership role in the school with other teachers, such that teachers can come to the arts teacher to understand where their children are, because the art teacher sees everybody, right? Everyone in that whole entire school is going to come through the arts educator. And I think what we were trying to do is place that arts teacher at the helm of the school along with the principal and the instructional leadership team, and then sort of really understand what challenges kids were having and how arts interventions can help address those. So having that experience, I can't wait till now we can try that with the 1,300 arts educators that are out there.
Yeah.
And then nearly 700 principals that are out there. I can't wait to try that as well.
Bill, it struck me in reading your book, Making the Impossible Possible, that when you're thinking about arts education and kind of this immersive experience, you're not just immersing them in an environment in which they can make and create, you're also interested in immersing them in an artistic environment, like an environment that is full of beauty and joy and music and sunlight. I mean, why is that so important? So when I think about redistribution, it's almost like you're sort of saying art exists in these certain realms of the world and you want to kind of spread it so that everyone has access to it.
One of the things I noticed was growing up in the poor neighborhood was that many of the people there were depressed every day. The living conditions, the crime, the drugs, the violence, and so forth. And so one of the things that occurred to me is, I wonder if you change the physical environment, if you could change the expectations. What got that going in my head, Mr. Ross took us to see a very famous house called Falling Water. The guy named Frank was right, the big architect. So we go see this fabulous house just south of Pittsburgh. It's flooded with sunlight with a creek running right down the middle of the house. And I said, man, in my neighborhood, we spend time trying to keep the water out of the house. This guy's got a creek running right down the middle of the place. That's an interesting way of looking at water. But what really hit me was that house had the same sunlight as my neighborhood, but the buildings were different. Wonder what would happen if you built a building like this in my neighborhood. And that was the genesis of the center that we run today. I decided I was going to hire a student at Frank Lloyd Wright, which I did. And I built a world-class training center in the toughest neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And it's completely changed the whole perception of value and outcomes in education. Our building was a skill model for Pittsburgh Airport, by the way. And so it's a stunning thing. And the many things I'm proudest of is no metal detector, no security cameras. We have millions in equipment. We have an active vandalism 28 years. No drugs, no alcohol, not one police call. In the middle of the inner city. So we know that environment drives behavior. Beautiful environments help to create beautiful kids. And once you get that conversation going, you can actually alter behavior. That's a big idea.
Yeah, I also feel the same way. I feel like one of the challenges that I at least have encountered here in Chicago Public Schools is that there's many different kinds of school buildings all across the city, and some that speak to exactly what Bill is saying, and some that are like the opposite. Yet I know at some point when that school opened, like whether it's in the 1890s or the 1960s, it was a beautiful building with great windows and sunlight, and these things happen. But what happens over time as communities shift, as school communities shift, and what does that do to the building and then to the culture, right? Like, there are schools where you walk inside, everyone you encounter is saying, hello, how are you, how is your day, what is your name, my name is Deep, I'm going to class. There are some when you walk into the building and people are asking you those questions, but it's more interrogative, like, what are you doing here, right? How can we sort of, what's going on here today? But like, how does that then translate into the kind of education and the kind of arts education that our kids are having? And the kind of experiences that our teachers are then having, right? And the kind of experience that our administrators are having to run those buildings in the conditions that they're in.
So do you have any control over that? I mean, are you able to, or how much does the arts ed plan think about environment and trying to change that environment? I mean, you're talking about elevating the kind of importance of the arts teacher, which seems like a big move, right? And part of that is making arts a core subject that's subjected to testing and is on the level of all the other subjects. But what about the kind of
actual physical spaces? Yeah. So, for example, there's we anticipate on our Creative Schools Certification Survey, which is the program through which arts liaisons in schools tell us what's happening in their schools, adding questions around the physical space of the school. Currently, those aren't on there, but there is a time at which those will be on, so we can understand which schools actually have dedicated spaces for the arts, which teachers are on carts, which music teachers are on the move. And then this is also currently not necessarily happening across the board. There are moments when new schools are designed at which architects convene groups of arts educators from our schools to ask, what should the art spaces in this school be like? What should the spaces be like? If there's a way that we can now translate that into the general practice of any time you renovate a school space or create a new school, convene the educators who would be teaching in those buildings, because they're the ones who can tell you what they need, where the plug should be, where the air duct should be, right? And then how can we then make that also, involve students in that process as well. But in terms of what we have of the arts education plan, we're currently beginning to move into a space where we're going to be talking about the quality of arts education. So the more in-depth we can talk about the arts education that kids are having, and what's the quality of it, and what are the quality of the outcomes, that then helps to elevate the profile of the arts more, so that asking arts teachers to always be at the table for physical spaces and planning is more likely to happen. Now, one of the things that I'm learning, since arts education is now a core content area, is that there are certain things you got to do as a core content area, right? There's certain, like, have assessments, right? And so even though we're not currently there, we anticipate having some sort of tool that is true and unique to the arts discipline to really understand where our students' learning and student outcomes are in the arts, in order to quantify that, to tell a much broader story about where the arts are for Chicago Public Schools teachers and students and principals.
Yeah, I mean, assessment is a big part of the arts, like as you have it laid out, right? That
right.
Assessing sort of curriculum, assessing teachers, what's happening. I mean, Bill, when you were kind of, like, because you think of, well, it was Manchester Craft Guild, then Manchester Bidwell, that's your school, right? I mean, you envision it as a school. And so where does that come into play? Where do you think, like, assessment plays a role in arts ed?
Well, I'm not a sort of quote, professional educator. And I wasn't trained in education. I just basically built a center. And I got into it.
Basically created a center.
I just kind of walked into it backwards. But what we noticed is that we were doubling the effective graduation rate for these kids in 36 months. So I would take this child who supposedly won't graduate in 9th grade. The demographic is 50% of those kids will never make it to 12th grade. I recruited those kids deliberately, put them in arts programs, and for the last 20 years, we've graduated over 90% of those kids from those school systems that we've just described. Last year was 99%. Now that's out of two possibilities. I'm the luckiest guy in Pittsburgh, or there's something about the strategy that we've created that's getting these outcomes. That's not luck, because we now have 8 centers open in the United States, and they're all getting those outcomes. So we know that there's some fundamental things that are required to get those results. Motivated faculty, no used equipment, good food, sunlight, values, enthusiasm, etc. You put all those ingredients together, and you put it in a nice physical environment, and sustain it for a period of time, you will get those outcomes every day of the week.
Right. And I hear those things, Bill, and I think about the project that I led with the arts teachers, and it's the exact same thing, except those were teachers. You provide them with the tools to understand how to look at student work in a more refined way. You honor the types of curriculum that they're implementing in the schools with the kids. You honor the students who they see every day of the week. And then you provide them with good food and some sunshine, a nice location like a privileged nature center, and the outcomes begin to speak for themselves. Throughout each year of that project, the trends were the more those arts teachers integrated content with other classroom teachers, increases in achievement in ISAT and reading and math going up to those schools each year as well. So it really speaks well about just like how to just honor the teacher as a learner and place them as a leader.
How much does it matter what the subject is? I mean, so Bill, for you, it started with ceramics, and I was talking about earlier, know your own happiness, because that does seem to be your philosophy, that the way you find success, whether you're a student or a teacher or an entrepreneur like you, is to understand what your dream is, like what you uniquely, individually want to do. So in your school, it kind of followed the interest you developed in Mr. Ross's class. It's ceramics, photography, you're doing digital arts, right, or media arts. I don't know if you count the culinary arts fall on the arts ed side or on the job training, both?
I think that the key is to find something you're excited about, but also to have the equipment, the tools to articulate your enthusiasm in a way that is measurable, where it is that you operate. What I've discovered is most learning is emotional, not intellectual. If you create emotionally nurturing environments, you will get learning. That's what I figured out. I won the MacArthur Fellowship, and the reason that you don't sort of apply for this thing, they have these looking for people like me, I guess. And anyway, I won this MacArthur, but from the little tidbits I've been able to piece together, the MacArthur people came to the conclusion that I figured out the cure for cancer of the spirit. That's why I won the MacArthur. Because I figured out if you could create an environment with lots of sunlight and lots of enthusiasm, lots of the arts, you could actually change the way that people see themselves. And if you can change the way they see themselves, you can change the outcomes and the results in behavioral terms. Translation. We have 3 PhDs that I started with in 7th grade who are masters at their subjects, but you would not have known it based on their academics. So I decided to ignore the academics and look at the kid. By the way, just let me add, this is another theory. This is my autobiography. See, I was a public school teacher for my students, but I didn't mention Mr. Ross saved my life. So the kid flunks flunks the SAT, going to college, graduates, is now a trustee of the place, which I am. I've done 20 honorary PhDs, and I used to fly 727 airlines for Frank Airlines. For the kid who was given up on by most of the teachers academically. And it's important that you understand that part of the story to see the rest of the story. Don't judge the book by the cover. You never know in what form your next MacArthur genius is going to show up.
In school, I did the exact same thing, right? Where I remember I was at an instructional leadership team meeting at Spry Community Academy, and we were looking at NWEA scores, and like everyone was doing this way or not so good, and it turned out that the students who were doing quite well were the ones who were in the orchestra program, and it was the music teacher was like, "Oh, those are my orchestra kids." And you could see the eyes of the principal light up and say, "Oh, well, maybe we need to start doing some more recruitment to the orchestra program. What do we need to have happen?" I also think about Tracy Netter from New Sullivan, who actually had the same story as well. New to the school and single-handedly changed this community of the school in and around arts, and just went to every teacher in that building saying, "How can I work with you? What can we do together? What kinds of projects do your students want to be learning?" And then she was able to do work with every classroom within just one school year, creating new relationships and getting teachers to talk to each other. I think it's really the same kinds of stories.
How do you scale that? I hate to use that term, but that's what everybody says. You take the model, the way Bill has taken this center he built and now is expanding it, 8 centers, one soon to be in Chicago and elsewhere. But how do you do it? How do you do that, Evan?
Right, well, I think a good place to start was with the arts liaisons. So the arts liaisons are arts advocates that are in schools. They're not necessarily the arts teacher. And if you think about the work we did with 120 arts educators at the magnet cluster, and then we're now doing that with nearly 600 arts liaisons in schools. And when we first implemented the arts liaison initiative, we had a total of 580. In 1 year, these individuals said, "I want to be the one to champion the arts in my school."
And just explain, I don't know, maybe everyone here knows, but who the arts liaisons are. Like it doesn't have to be an arts teacher.
Right, so one thing that we found when we were coming up with the arts education plan is that everyone was asking for some sort of arts advocate who would be at a school. Like, if you're interested in the arts and you want to know what's happening in the arts at someone's school, like, who do you call? And we didn't have a person to call because it could be anybody, the teacher, the principal, the arts education department. So we said, no, we need someone in the school full-time who knows what's happening, and that person essentially helps us to move arts education opportunities and information to the students and teachers that need them, right? It is a voluntary position, so these people are not receiving a stipend, but what these individuals receive is ongoing training on what it means to be an arts advocate, what it means to move information, how to do the survey, and what to do with that information. And then it was it's created such a groundswell because people want to be engaged. People want to see their schools improve. Mm-hmm. Even if you're at the highest performing school, you want to see it improve even more. So people wanted to do more for the arts at their schools. So then we created Lead Arts Liaisons, which is an elevated role for arts liaisons, which they have to apply and interview, and then they get specialized training on how to be a leader. And so the Lead Arts Liaisons now are providing training for the arts liaisons. They're actually triaging for the arts liaisons. I've seen cases where an arts liaison contacts a lead and said, "My principal told me this about my observation. What do I do? I'm looking for a specific program that would integrate technology and sports and drama. Who do I contact?" And the leads respond to that. So it actually creates more of like a tiered arts army, right? That's out there ensuring that more children, more teenagers have access to the arts. So I think that's how you scale it. So I think what I would anticipate could be a next step for the liaisons is sort of providing the leads with more support, and then increasing the leadership of the arts liaisons on the ground. Like, what more can they do? Now that they know how to do the survey, now that they know how to inform us about what's happening in the arts, now that they know how to move information, what more can they be doing? And I'm really interested in those arts liaisons that aren't arts teachers. Like, I think about Yvette Vasquez at DeVry Academy High School, who's the Spanish teacher and constantly walks up to students in her classroom and in the hallway and say, here's an awesome program happening over the summer. You like to draw. I know you like to sing. You need to be in this summer camp. She's pushing so many opportunities, and we see so many of her students coming and in our programs. And this is the Spanish teacher. So imagine who else is out there that's not necessarily like an arts educator, but is an arts advocate and not necessarily the arts liaison from the school. Think of the linkages and collaborations that could happen. The other thing that I would also add is that starting next fall, something I'm really happy about, we're going to be implementing a program for assistant principals called Creative Compass. So here's an opportunity to really impact emerging school leaders in arts practices that will lead to changes in their schools. And it's an ongoing program. It's not like one time here, okay, I'll see you next year. It's an ongoing program where we get to see at least hopefully a lot of APs over the course of the school year, creating opportunities so that we can be the Frank Ross for administrators so that they can be inspired to increase the content of the arts so that their school cultures and climate and achievement can actually change.
So you're kind of creating this like cadre of advocates and cheerleaders for the arts.
Right.
Within the school and across the system. And what's the mantra? Like, what is the philosophy behind arts ed at CPS?
Great question. I mean, it's all about, I think one of the things we have to do is changing the conversation, right? Because we always hear, I heard this from Mario, but I wanted to steal it from you, but it's so true. The arts don't exist, they're dying, they're the first to get cut, they're not important. Imagine what it must feel like for an art educator in schools to hear that on a daily basis. Imagine what it must feel like for a student who loves the arts at a school to hear that on a daily basis. That's not fair, and we need to stop that conversation. So I'm really encouraging people to think about saying, I know something different. So when somebody says, the arts aren't important, the arts won't help you in school, the arts won't get you anywhere, your arts grades don't matter, I know something different. And I think in each of the programs, in each of the communities that we being the arts education department, interface with, so arts liaisons, arts teachers, arts partners, APs, we want them to be thinking that they know something different. And that thing that is different is that the arts does create a change in the school culture and climate. It impacts achievement, it impacts reading and critical thinking, and more importantly, like Ken Robinson would say, like, it actually encourages creativity in all subject areas. Because all subject areas have an artfulness and have a heart to it. Mm-hmm. Like, when I read Jane Austen and think about Mr. Darcy. There's an artfulness to the way the words are put together. There's an artfulness to math and science. There's an artfulness to understanding languages and world languages. And I think the arts liaisons and the arts army that we're creating out there will be in a position to push.
Well, I mean, one of the things that really makes the arts count is the bottom line, right? I mean, like, for example, CPS got $10.5 million to hire new arts teachers, proper, right? So art teachers are important. Money for the arts is important. Bill, this is something you have proven, and amongst all your other talents, wildly successful at from the beginning of your career, but forward, attracting money to the arts, right? In the midst of whatever the saying, and we know this to be true, this kind of idea that the arts aren't important or they're the first thing to go. So how have you made that case? How do you fight for the arts and for arts education?
We get outcomes. We get results. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. We can take a child who has been struggling, say, in the school system for years that's probably not as enthusiastic about that child as they need to be. But it costs $18,000 to $20,000 a year to pay for that child anyway. They drop out in 10th grade. The cost is close to $200,000 of investment that goes up the smokestack when the kid drops out. For $2,500 a year, I enrolled that same child in our sports program in partnership with the public schools. And 99% of the kids graduated last year. And then many of them go to college, and they become professionals, and they pay for the program 20 times over. Or, if you calculate the cost of one child in the criminal justice system, which happens to be in Pennsylvania, $38,000 a year per person, they come to our program, they go to work, you've saved $38,000, and you have a productive citizen. Do the math. Forget the liberal argument. This has nothing to do with this. This is called common sense, which happens to be in very short supply in our country right now. Do the math. And so, what we're saying is, we can give you a return on your investment. We can give a public return on investment. And you invest in the arts because what Evan's doing, and what a number of these people in the audience are doing, what we're doing, is literally providing life-enhancing opportunities for people who are considered liabilities, but they're actually assets in disguise. And that's where you place your investment, and that's where you get your return.
How did you, so you, in a sense, built your own school, and in fact, you inherited a job training, or you took over a job training center, right? And realized that you were kind of stuck with this building and this kind of attitude that was sort of locked into failure in a way. And the way you got out of that was you literally built another center, the center that you have now, and you integrated the jobs training with the arts education. So you kind of did it on your own, like, whereas Evan is working within this huge system, but I know you had to kind of navigate a lot of bureaucracy too and deal with politics. So how do you manage that? Because I think that is also any good legislator, if you're going to make your case, you have to know how to move through all of that. So how do you do that?
Well, we don't have enough time for that. We'll come back this year. But one thing you have to do is find Evan in every school system. They're there. You just have to find them. But the second thing is, you've got to bring some money and resources to the table. Okay? Because the guys in the system are scuffling, trying to hold what they got. So we don't want to add to their burden, we want to lighten their burden. So we've gotten very good at raising private money that we bring to the public education conversation. And it's the intersection of those two, potentially where the excitement is. I think the other thing we have to recognize is, you've got to become multilingual if you're in the arts. You've got to talk corporate, social enterprise, mental health, all the above, because that's the conversation that is increasingly being demanded. It is not art to have a nice day. It's art to save your life. And I think that's the mantra. And I've been able so far in 8 U.S. cities to make that connection so that centers have been funded with that proposition. We're going to build one here in Chicago. Well, the same idea. And we've got him sitting on the stage, so we've already connected.
I would also echo that in the sense when I think about the Be Creative campaign, which is spearheaded by our arts education, advocacy, friends, and ingenuity, and just like raising over $11 million over the course of 2 years, and just even less than that, to support the actions of the arts education plan. You're right, it's about having the ideas, whether they're lofty or not, they're ideas and they're valid, and you also need the financial capital behind it to scaffold up and make it possible. Because people do respond to some dollar signs, or euro signs, or yen signs, and people respond to that. And I think what it also shows is that that you're serious, that there's like, the actions that you are claiming that you want to do are going to happen because you are out there campaigning to so many different types of communities in order to raise the funds to make those things happen.
I guess it requires political capital too, right? Because the Arts Ed plan came out of the Chicago Cultural Plan.
Right.
And this
It's
is
a
something,
collective will, right?
Yeah.
And not that this happens in every city all of the time, but when you have the mayor's office and the mayor and all of those departments and the people of the city of Chicago asking for arts education to happen and to stay in schools and to be supported. And then you have teachers and principals in the arts education department saying, we need a strategic plan to really impact arts education for all learners. You know, we had that happen in 2012. In a brief moment of time, we had to seize that opportunity, right? Whether that was, I mean, I call that the collective will of the people and all the stars on the Chicago flag aligning. But it's also, you know, seizing an opportunity. What would have happened had we said, oh, the people of Chicago want arts education? Well, I get, let's make a plan. No, we were doing this concurrently. So we really were at the crest of the wave in terms of trying to ensure that arts education could be, you know, humanly possible, a possibility for all students.
I want to pick up on what you were talking about, that one of the next centers you're building is here in Chicago in the North Lawndale neighborhood, right? And we have the chair of the board of the Chicago Arts and Technology Center, Steve Sarowitz. Welcome. Hi.
Yes.
So just briefly, can you tell us a little bit about where that project is at? What's happening?
We are running very active.
Yeah, I think he's.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. We started last year. I called Bill last year. I saw him speak about 6 years ago and said, Bill, would you like to come to Chicago? He'd been trying for several years. We're making great progress. We have a great board. Our raise your hand, our CEO is right there, Stefan, and Dan, also on the board. So I want to say that we have a very active board. We are in the process of finalizing the purchase of the building, and we're going to bring Bill Strickland, who I consider an American legend, to Chicago. So I'm just thrilled that he's coming to Chicago, his ideas are coming to Chicago, and that we can help kids in Chicago, which we're supposed to be opening, and we're scheduled to open next year, 2016.
And so what got you involved? I mean, what was it about Bill's project that you felt you really needed to bring to Chicago? What's the connection for you?
I saw Bill speak in Inc. 500 magazine, the fastest growing companies. At the time, I was head of one of the fastest growing privately held companies. That company went public last year. And so I did well financially. I told Bill that if I ever had any money, I'm going to give you a call, and I'm sure he didn't believe me. And I did. And my motivation is this, that if you are fortunate enough to have a little extra money, that you should use that money. Maybe if you want to buy a nice car or a nice house, that's great, but I think to help others is primarily what you're doing. I was fortunate enough to get to know Bill. We've become phenomenal friends over the last year. I'm grateful that I've just gotten to know him, school or no school. He's a great person, and what he's done over the last 40 years is remarkable, and the fact that I can be involved in that is a privilege, and I can tell you that I've definitely gotten a lot more out of this investment than anything else I've ever done in my life. I'm now on his national board. He took me all the way to Akko, Israel, which is the most beautiful city I've ever seen, and we're building a school there. And now Bill and I are committed together to build schools all over the world.
Terrific. I have many more questions, but I want to give everyone here an opportunity to start asking some questions. We've got microphones coming around, so if you have a question, just put your hand in the air. So here.
First of all, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. Your words are so inspirational. A problem that I often see in the dialogue about arts education, which came up sometimes tonight, is the idea that the arts scene needs to end. This idea that we should focus on arts education because it helps kids become more critical thinkers. It will help them become doctors and lawyers and successful businessmen if we give them the arts. I'm curious, what do you think we can do to help administrators, parents, community members see that the arts have value just for the sake of the arts, and by exposing kids to the arts, we can help them become professional artists, and that's great in its own right. What do you think we can do to change that conversation?
Well, I think the word you used is exposure. That's the key to the whole thing. The arts can speak for themselves. You just have to get people in the room so that the arts can do what it knows how to do. We do, for example, a thing called third grade jazz. We bring every third grader from the public school system on yellow buses once a year, and we have professional musicians on stage explaining what jazz is all about, call and response, syncopation, this and that. These children have never heard of the word jazz, but they're in love with what they hear. And those young people are going to be advocates for this music because of the way it's impacted the way they feel about themselves. That is the most eloquent description of the arts I've ever seen. And it comes literally from the mouths of children. So I think that the arts has inherently good things to offer. Our job is to get enough people in the room so we can do what we know how to do.
I often struggle with that because I feel like as an artist, you still need the skills of reading, writing, critical thinking, processing information, processing numbers. I feel like the strongest arts education you can have to become a professional artist is a well-rounded education that includes mathematics, science, history, world language, and the art forms, right? I feel like they are connected and they still create artists in their own right.
There's a hand here, and there was another hand in the back there.
I was curious, how do you find the intersection? So you have arts educators who are usually artists, and then you have educators who, a lot of times the way the university system works when you study education is you kind of leave really focused on test scores. How do you educate the educators to think creatively and to think outside the box and to use other tactics, especially encouraging them to tap into their inner artists to also be more creative in how to teach?
Right. It's a really good question. One of the landscapes that we really, I feel, since in my own career at CPS, have not really explored is the pre-service programs and really trying to see exactly just what are these schools teaching the future educators. And how and when will we be able to impact that landscape in order to show that it is important to know how to integrate the arts and integrate all content areas together and begin to break down the perception that it's all about the benchmark examinations, right? Like how and when can we inform the way teachers are educated to say it's not about testing, it's about some other things as well. And then bring out the true value of all content areas. Like I was saying before, the heart behind reading and writing, the heart behind math and science, the heart behind the arts.
Well, you're going to have to be patient because these folks don't get it. We're going to have to stay at this for a while. But sooner or later, the evidence is going to become so overwhelming that there really is not going to be much choice. Part of my goal is to build 200 centers in the U.S. that are doing what the first 8 are doing. That gets very hard to ignore after a while. Because here are 8 U.S. cities that are doubling the effective graduation rate for kids who are academically marginal, supposedly. Well, how's that happening? There's got to be something inherent in the nature of the strategy that we're employing that ought to lead you to the conclusion there's something very bright going on here. And sooner or later, as slow as they are, politicians will actually listen if you overwhelm them with evidence. My big supporter in Pennsylvania is a conservative Republican leader of the state Senate who came to visit our center, said, "You're doing more with these children than any remediation program I've ever seen. This is a good investment." Now, I didn't sell him on the arts. I didn't try to convert him into a Democrat. What I decided to do was to allow this man to respond in the way that he was comfortable with. But he turned out to be a big supporter. So they will come in many forms. You've got to be very open and willing to listen.
But, I mean, Bill, you've been doing this for over 40 years, right? So sort of, I mean, even if you see the long game, that's a long time to be in it. That's a lot of different politicians and different systems to operate in to kind of make that argument again and again. And here we are, it's that disconnect. We're sitting in a place that kind of is an expression of our culture's belief in the arts and the pleasure of the arts for art's sake. And yet, in our educational system, there seems to be this kind of like continuing idea that the arts are not a priority. So how do you get beyond that kind of...
Very slowly. It's left foot, front, and right. If you're in a hurry, you're in the wrong profession. Do sell pizzas or something. To do business.
It's a farm for you in Georgia.
You're going to have to be around for a while. It's going to take a while.
And I think that it's okay to take a long time. Like improvements in education is an ongoing thing. Like, it will be 2,800 something, and we will still be having this. Hopefully not about the arts, or we would have transcended that. But there will be a newer concern about how to improve the educational pathways for people.
Hi. Good evening, Ava Youngblood, actually on the Shakespeare, and thank you all for being here. Also on the Board of Communities and School, National, Local, the largest dropout prevention organization in the country. Bill Strickland, thank you for being here. Allison, thank you for Bill, thank you for being here, your vision. Bill's backer, love you. Okay, thank you, keep it up. Evan, we talk about change. We're bringing something that used to be in the school system. I'm a product of Chicago Public Schools. And I had art, I had home economics. I hope that's what you include in art, because we need to teach people how to cook again. And we had all of those things. And I ended up going to Northwestern major in chemical engineering, but art was important. I still love to cook. It's my way of being creative. In this room, you have people who support this idea. Anytime you bring change into a system, you're going to encounter resistance. I'm curious, where do you think in Chicago we will encounter resistance? Because this makes all the great sense in the world. And if we know that, what are we doing to avoid that? So we can accelerate the implementation of this.
Right. I'm going to celebrate that there has been no resistance. Right. I'm going to celebrate that there has actually been an alliance between arts educators, its partners, school administrators, and the collective will of the city of Chicago. We are now in a school district where 96% of our schools have arts education happening in them in some form, right? Of some arts discipline. Yeah, we also where, because we were able to open up the high school graduation requirements to include drama, theater, and dance, we're seeing whole-scale increases in those courses at the high school level, like tripling, quadrupling, right? And so it's because of the fact that we were all allies in creating and implementing the arts education plan that I think those things were able to occur. And as we move into this newer phase where we can now begin to talk about the quality, I anticipate that we'll still be on board with that with allies, and I will still celebrate that as a victory. And I hope that everyone also will, because it is for our city.
Hi, my name is Johnson. I'm a music educator and CPS, also a medical fellow. I worry when I hear that we will have testing, because that's what's happened to the teaching profession, which is also an art. We've tested the brilliance out of it to a certain extent. Right. And I worry that when we say, well, we have to test the arts, what are you going to test? What is going to be assessed? I'm not going to tell my first grader who can't quite match pitch yet that you're not doing it right. I want to be able to say, like Mr. Strickland, but these outcomes are the long game. And here's the long game shot. This is what we're going for. And you can't look at it as, did they learn how to read a note once a week for 45 minutes over the course of 10 months, when they're also really worried about all this other testing going on? Can we not keep it more pure than that? Because it's better than that.
Brilliant question. Thank you so much for answering. So I want to be clear. I said an assessment system, not a testing system, right? And assessment in its purest form comes from the Greek, right, asene, where it means you're going to sit next to someone and watch and guide. So when I think about an assessment system for the arts, it is not a test. It is not fill out this bubble. It's not make this sound and I'll listen to it. It's actually about the process that goes into teaching and learning. And I'm really curious about processes that are unique to that arts discipline.
The other thing I would add is he's going to need a lot of support from you all, because anytime you try to institute that kind of progress, you are going to meet resistance. And he's going to need to be encouraged as the leader to stay at it. That's a fact, because you don't get innovative leaders staying in the system very long, because they get discouraged, they get disappointed, they get worn down, they have lives beyond school and so on. So they need a broad base of support, including guys like me and Steve and Sequoia, who are championing what he's talking about, because that's how you ultimately get systemic change. It's not just voting. It's really articulating your vocal support, your physical support for the innovation that's happening. That strengthens his hand. And at least these school boards are at least somewhat required to listen to the public once in a while. And I think the more that they can hear voices supporting what you're hearing on the stage, the stronger it allows him to be.
Right, and I'd be really happy to see what an assessment system unique to the arts would look like as a model for other concepts. Imagine if we could say to reading, writing, and mathematics, you don't need a Scantron examination. You don't need a corner bubble. Something else that you could really show children learning how to use their brains and think creatively.
Now, Howard Gardner did a lot of work in this, the multiple intelligence strategy. That would be worth revisiting, because he won a MacArthur, by the way, for this system, that he came up with different ways of measuring what we're talking about. It's like an artistic IQ, and there were very interesting ways in which he looked at this phenomenon. When Howard visited my center, he said it was the best visual demonstration of the theory of multiple intelligence he'd ever seen. And I had no sort of official measurements. We basically had classes with very fine artists and kids who were excited about doing something productive. And he felt that that was pretty much in line with the theory. So I would encourage you strongly to go back and revisit some of Howard's work.
We're also looking at the work that was created in Memphis Public Schools and around arts assessment, and like looking at ongoing portfolios of student work throughout the process of a unit or throughout the process of a semester, to really understand exactly where children are growing in their arts discipline and their arts learning.
More questions. There are lots of questions. To the former head of arts education, Department of Arts Education, CPS, Mario Rosero. And so I don't know all of your names. I should prepare for this.
She's been waiting me to ask a question for like 2 years.
Right.
Bill and Evan, I have a question about innovation. So, with art forms and interests changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up. And so students are interested in artistic expressions that might be new and cutting edge. So I would love to hear about what you're noticing as trends in innovative art practices and what programs you're offering to address what students are really interested in right now.
I'll give you one, because we're instituting it right now. we're going to 3D imaging as a strategy for our arts curriculum. We're putting a $500,000 center together. And it's fascinating to watch these young people master this technology just by being exposed to it, not even reading the manuals. And so what we're trying to do is to stay ahead of the learning curve to the extent that we can, so that we're constantly innovating on best practices in terms of the offerings that we provide for the kids that we work with, so that our philosophy is to continually be in an entrepreneurial culture. The place I run in Pittsburgh is not a program, it's an attitude. And every time there's a new idea that can advance the intellectual and emotional understanding of the creative process, I raise some money and create a program to do that. What happens when you create that culture? He actually touched on it earlier. You create a culture of innovation, and that's where your new ideas come from. You allow the faculty to drive the process rather than the system to drive the faculty. And that's what we've been able to do on a community level. And it's been, so far, it's very encouraging.
Great question. So, out of Arts Education Department, we've provided opportunities for students to make art in our alt city programs, which is essentially providing a platform for kids to really showcase interdisciplinary practices in the arts, like using new media, using their cell phones to create short films, to create GIFs, which are then projected onto walls, providing students an opportunity to really engage in graffiti as an urban art form. We also have alt genres operating in our performing arts programs, where kids are able to create art and compositions in genres like hip-hop, spoken word, poetry, electronic beats. We just had our all-city performing arts showcase last night, and there was a team of DJs who were just literally on iPads and phones making these amazing sounds and compositions as if they were like in Documenta. You know, it was extremely impressive. And so we were really interested in also trying to honor the artwork that students make at home that's not part of the school day and after school, out of school time programs. So our all-city visual art program actually provides them an opportunity to share the work they're creating, whether it's on their phones or their iPads. Gaming is really hot, and we also want to honor that as well. We also have a program specifically for arts for students in the high school level called Advanced Arts, in which students take honors and AP coursework at the end of their school day, and there's actually a digital modeling course that's really popular with students, where they're able to create these environments that translate into installation and into architecture, and this is in the art. So then we also see the same things happening in our career and technical education programs, which is not necessarily under the arts education purview, but there are programs in new media, digital media, design, and architecture.
Just a quick follow-up, because reading Bill's book and looking at things through the center, I mean, like, having the parents involved seems really important, and you put a lot of effort. You hired someone to figure out how to get the parents to come out to these showcases and shows for those students in the center. So what is there, is that part of the arts plan, or how do you, like we were talking about the showcase last night, I mean, how important is parental involvement in this kind of new plan and what you're trying to do with it in terms of your success?
It's like quintessential. Like, if you don't have a mom and dad or a grandmother or an aunt and uncle or some adult at home to push the arts learning or any learning of a child, it won't work. Because they're only in our buildings for 6.5 hours. There's 24 hours in a day, right? So what's happening the rest of that time, those kids are probably in some space that's either going to scaffold what they're learning in school or tear it down, right? So in terms of the arts education plan, we do look at our parents as a key stakeholder. When we were creating the plan, we actually met with parents on many occasions to ask them what kinds of arts education would you like to see your children have, and their ideas then went into the arts education plan. So things like having an arts liaison, that's actually one of the kinds of ideas that came from the parent panels that we actually have.
Questions? Go here.
Hi, I'm a teaching artist, curriculum designer, a little bit of everything. And since you both have worked in other cities and are also looking at other models of the country and the world, I'm wondering what you found unique about Chicago, both in terms of potentially challenges and assets, in terms of doing arts education here.
Really good question. Well, what I find here is that Chicago has a cultural sector that is completely behind ensuring that arts education remains a priority for adult learners, youth learners. There's so much energy in the arts partner community to support what arts teachers do in schools, and also to expand their resources outside of their organizations to really ensure that whatever plays or programs that are happening, they really want to see everyone in Chicago participating, and they actually have the resources to stand behind that. I haven't really seen that in other cities. Granted, like Los Angeles and Maputo, Mozambique are my references, which Maputo doesn't have much in terms of arts organizations entering into schools. But I feel it here in that those are the organizations and the artists that actually love what we do in the arts education department, and they actually love what arts teachers do in schools.
Bill, have you spent enough time in Chicago to respond to that? Or?
No.
I don't want to be on the spot.
No, not really, but I can say we did meet with the superintendent, and she was really excited about this partnership opportunity. That's not always the case. I'd say probably 60 to 70% respond by how's this going to benefit me, as opposed to how's it going to benefit the kids. And so we clearly got a very strong, supportive message from your superintendent, for which I'm very, very grateful, and we're very excited to be working with you. And the reality is they hired this guy. That will tell you something. You know, I would like to believe there would be equivalents of Evan in these other cities. That is not the case. So I think you're known by the decisions that you make. So I think you guys could be very excited about the fact that there is a person who's got a portfolio and a lot of activity going on in this space. That's unusual, and we're very excited to be here for that reason.
Hi, I'm Mary Morissette. I'm a documentary film producer, and I work a lot with Cartemplin Films. And I wonder, I loved hearing about a corporate background as a commercial real estate broker, and I love the return on investment conversation that you had, and wonder if both of you could speak to how we can better involve the Chicago business community, which is a remarkable supporter of the major art and cultural organizations in the city. How can we get that collective will together to really make an impact on the Chicago public school system, where we really need it, I think, even more? I mean, we need it in both places, but we really need it there.
Well, one thing you can do, which we're doing here, you get the corporate committee involved with your activity. For example, Steve's our chair, and he's a business guy from the technology sector, and we're going around talking to other business leaders in Chicago to make the story more evident. But you have to go talk to them more than once. It's got to be more than a brochure. We really have got to recruit the corporate sector to be actively involved in this work. It's almost like creating a different dialogue in the community, so that every city where we go, we make sure that that is a top priority on the list of things that we do, to go talk with the corporate leaders. In your case, it's the medical industry, which is very powerful here. Hospitality, food and beverage is very powerful. Financial services and IT is powerful. Those people, we're having dialogue with those folks right now and literally recruiting them to be a part of this conversation. I should say that our arts brothers and sisters don't quite get that as readily as I'd like to see that happen. We need to broaden our constituency and broaden our base. But I think that's perfectly something that's well within our capability to do.
Right, and I would add to that that I think it's important for us to put our actions first. So when I think about the team of Ingenuity who's really pushing the Be Creative campaign and all the energy with which they do that, it's in and around our actions. So being able to show what's been happening with the arts education plan and the momentum that we've gained with our nearly 600 arts liaisons and the programs that we are doing with the Creative Schools certification and the Creative Schools small grants that actually get placed into schools, and be able to show the impact of those programs, to show that arts teachers and arts liaisons are coordinating with classroom teachers and arts organizations to really engage students in the arts in meaningful ways, and having the artifacts to show that really does help that. And I think there's a little something too about the upsell, right? So if there's anyone in the corporate community who's already on a board, is there a way to upsell them to a newer project or to a newer idea that hasn't been explored yet in the arts? And then what would that look like? What would that conversation look like? And then does that create a bridge to more sustained arts education activities and initiatives?
You can head up for a while. Gentleman back here.
Good evening. I just want to give you a shout out from the third institutional partner here at National Louis University. We've been in town preparing educators for almost 130 years, and we never left the John Dewey tradition of pragmatism and naturalism. So I have a proposition for you and a question for you. The proposition is involve aspiring teachers, teacher candidates in your work, because they will catch your passion and you will raise passionate educators that way. My question is, as you followed Allison's lead in looking at scaling up and taking your dream to other cities, you need expanded leadership in your organization. So my question is, what is the key ingredient you look for in new leaders in your effort?
What I call the entrepreneurial spirit. And it doesn't have anything to do with business. It has everything to do with the way you look at life, as a set of possibilities or a set of limitations. I choose possibilities. And you get, after a while, you can feel it and identify it. And the idea is to not only identify it, but to sustain it. For example, the Bill Strickland School of Management is, go out and find a piece of the world that you want to conquer, get somebody to fund it, and I'll print a card that says you're the vice president of that. You'd be surprised what a motivating tool that could be. So what the idea is that, look, get something that you're really passionate and enthusiastic about, and we'll back you. That, unfortunately, oftentimes doesn't happen to just teachers. They're isolated, they're alone, they don't get the encouragement, and after a while the spirit begins to lag and to fail. We have to figure out a better system for allowing those leaders to continue to grow and to be brilliant and to be bright.
I'm really interested in leaders who have your back, right? And if that means you lead from behind, then you lead from behind. But I really think that there's a crew of leaders who want to see you succeed or see your thinking succeed. That's what we need. We need more people who are just going to have your back, push you forward, because they trust in your thinking and they trust in the heart behind your thinking. And they are willing to support you in the challenges that you're encountering because they know they want to see you do well.
So we're going to have a reception after this out in the lobby, so I hope you'll all stay and know the opportunity to talk more with Bill and Evan. But I wanted to end with one question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially over the last few days. I don't know if anybody saw this, that the entire first year MFA class at the University of Southern California resigned, right? I mean, 8 students, they said that the program had been so radically altered that it, that the kind of promises they were brought in under have been completely evacuated, and that it wasn't really going to give them the kind of education they signed up for, and that kind of immersion in the arts and like study of the arts, serious study of the arts. And it's not just happening in California. I mean, UT Austin, people are concerned about the kind of, in the focus on STEM, that the fine arts department has really kind of gone down. And we're seeing this happening a lot. And one of the things I imagine when we were talking earlier about pipelines, you were talking about this, is that, and your idea about the arts safe, that arts education in the schools is to produce artists and people who might want to go to college and continue their study of the arts. But if we're seeing a kind of diminishment of the arts in that sphere, what does that mean for the work that you're doing?
It means we have to work harder.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not that you give up, you redeploy. You recognize that there are challenges and you dig deeper. But at the end of the day, the arts will survive directly as the result of the constituency that supports the arts. That's why we spend so much time working on young people, because they may not literally be artists themselves, but they will certainly have a warmth and a support for the arts for their kids. And at the end of the day, we got to broaden the base of people who understand this vocabulary. That's the only possible way we're going to survive. It's not just a few of us, working in this space. We're going to have a lot of us working in this space. I believe every day I get up, it's possible I want to do this for a living.
Yeah. I feel like if young people have an arts education that is teaching them to create an experiment, to make choices, to communicate complex ideas about their lives and the lives of others, and that builds metacognition, then they're going to make the right choices, whether that's to pursue an arts education after high school or after middle school or not, or to engage in an arts literate and arts rich life, right? If we do the due diligence to provide an arts education that does those 4 things, I think people will be able to make the right choices for the arts in the face of all that adversity that the arts may not exist in certain parts, right? And so that's what I'm working toward, is to really see what that can happen for our students.
So Bill, are we going to see more of you around Chicago?
Unfortunately, probably yes. I won't be moving here.